What's up everyone, my name is Joe and welcome to Film Focused. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Pentacon 6, but before we get into that, I'd like to say a quick thank you to all my subscribers. I just recently hit the 100 subscriber mark and I know that isn't too big of a deal, but I haven't had this channel up for a full 100 days, so I think that's pretty cool to see that many people who are interested in, putting faith into this channel and supporting it, without really any knowledge of where it's headed. So thank you guys so much. I'm really excited and motivated to keep creating content and putting new stuff out there for you guys to enjoy and learn from. So without further ado, let's get into the video. The Pentacon 6 is a German-built medium format film camera. It shoots 6x6 negatives on 120 or 220 rolls of film. On a 120 roll you get 12 images, on a 220 roll you get 24 images. Now there is a way to sneak an extra image onto either roll that you shoot, and I'll tell you more about that a little bit later. Back in the day, these cameras were built for professionals in mind, and they were really built like tanks. The entire camera is made of metal, and it is completely mechanical, so there's no battery compartment, there's no electrical pieces or wiring whatsoever in the system. It relies on a system of gears and springs to make the entire camera system work. Now that is somewhat of an upside, but it's also a pretty major downside for this camera. If you run into any minor issues, it can't be fixed by just putting in a new battery into the camera. You will most likely have to get it serviced. The two biggest areas where you run into issues are with the film advance lever and then the actual shutter that's housed in the lens, in the camera body. There are a lot of really small springs and levers in the film advance lever, and if you let it slap back to the camera, you run the risk of your film actually overlapping images, and even worse, you could just completely break the mechanism and your camera won't function anymore. As for the shutter speeds, as long as the camera is used relatively consistently, even if it's just dry fired, the camera will almost self-lubricate the shutter and it will work just fine. But because these cameras are so old, if it hasn't been cleaned and serviced in a long time, the shutter can actually get stuck and will remain open without actually finishing a shutter cycle. That is the case with this camera. I knew that going into the purchase. The seller let me know that the shutter speed of 1/125th does not finish, so I can work around that, and I got a pretty good price cut for this one that I picked up. I want to say I paid $140 for the entire system, lens, and viewfinder. So if you do your research, you can find a really good quality camera at a very bargain price, especially due to the fact that the image quality that you get with this camera, it rivals that of Hasselblad. So, buying a Hassie can be really expensive, but if you're looking to get into 6x6, this is a really great option for you to take a look at. Another camera system that is pretty synonymous with the Pentacon 6 is the Kev 60. It's almost built identical to the Pentacon 6, and it shoots really good quality 6x6 negatives, but at a bargain price. You can find them for very similar prices as the Pentacon 6. From the research that I did when I was looking for this camera, I thought it was beneficial to pick up the Pentacon as opposed to the Kev or the Kev 60, but I've also heard just marvelous things about that system as well, so just take that with a grain of salt. Another thing to remember with this being a mechanical camera, there's no light meter built into the system. So you're gonna have to use either a handheld light meter, or you can buy prisms that have a meter built in that work with the system. They do tend to be a little rare and on the pricey side, especially if you're buying from a collector. So do your research and try and find something that might work for you, but I like working with the waist level viewfinder, so I just take my handheld light meter with me whenever I'm shooting with this camera. So on the front right of the camera, we have the shutter button, which can be used with a threaded cable release, and it also has a nice little locking dial here. You can rotate that around With the red dot facing up, that means that it's locked, and when you don't see that little red dot, the shutter can fire. You also have your self-timer lever here. You twist that down and it gives you about 10 seconds of time before the shutter will release. These tend to be a little finicky, so confirm with whomever you're buying from that the camera has been serviced and that the self-timer works. I found that with a lot of the cameras that I was doing research on, they were kind of 50-50 split on whether or not the self-timer worked. And always be sure to test it out without film in the camera before you try and trust it in the field. On the top right of the camera, we have the film advance lever and a little film ISO memo dial to help remind you what film is in the back of the camera. There is no memo window in the back of the camera, and this doesn't really tell the camera any information. Rather, it's just a reminder for you for when you're metering while shooting with this camera. There's also this little kind of lever button here on the side of the camera. And what that is there for is when you finish a roll of film or you're halfway through a roll of 220. Once you've hit that once you've shot your 12th image, it won't let you advance the lever. So what you'll have to do is push that little kind of side lever forward and then advance your film. From there, you can, wind the end of your roll up and then take it out of the camera, or just continue shooting your roll of 220 as normal. On the left side of the camera, we have your shutter speed dial, which is set in full stops from 1/1000th to bulb. There's also a flash sync setting, which is really just 1/30th of a second, but it will allow you to use off-camera lights. On the top of the camera, we have the waist level viewfinder, which is equipped with this nice little magnifying glass that you can use to very accurately adjust your focus. Now, I have used this both when shooting portraits and landscapes, and it is deadly accurate. It does an amazing job. To take this off, there is a button to just the left of the viewfinder. You press that down, slide the viewfinder back, and it pops right off. Here you can either clean or actually replace the focusing screen, and if you have an older version or one that hasn't been very well taken care of, these focusing screens tend to be a little dull and hard to see through, but you can get them replaced and repaired relatively easily. There is a website online that I found a little bit ago that I was going to use, but I haven't been using this camera as much as I used to, so I haven't yet invested in a new focusing screen. But if that's something that you'd like to do, you can absolutely do it. On the bottom of the camera, we have a tripod thread and also your flash sync port. And there are also these two knobs on the bottom of the camera that will allow you to remove and put in new rolls of film once we open the back of the camera. To do that, there is a little tab on the left side of the camera. You slide that down and the back opens right up. This is where you would put in a new roll. This is where your take-up spool goes. This is where the image area is exposed, and this is your actual shutter. So be sure not to touch it. You don't want to damage it or accidentally rip a hole in it, because then you're going to get light leaks and the camera won't work properly and you got to spend more money on it. So be very, very gentle with it. This little white dot is where you wind on a new roll of film and align the arrow to. Now, if you align the arrow slightly before the dot, what you will do is actually cause the first frame of the image to be slightly before when it should be. Now you'll still get the full first image on the roll, but what that will do by the time you get to the end of it is you can actually sneak on a 13th image if you wind it on properly. I've done this many times successfully, but do take that 13th image with a grain of salt and don't expect any amazing results. Use it as kind of a fun experiment to see if you can get it or not. And once you have your formula kind of set, you can almost rely completely on getting 13 images per roll. A fun little trick with this camera. Now let's talk about my favorite part of this camera, the lens. The one that I purchased this with is a Carl Zeiss 80mm 2.8. And I made sure to get this particular lens with this system for a few reasons. First and foremost, Carl Zeiss is an amazing company, and they've been known for years and years and years for their optics quality. And this lens in particular is probably the best, if not one of the best lenses to use with this system. There are other lenses that you can get if you'd like to shoot on a wider angle or something a little bit tighter, but I'm kind of a sucker for standard lenses, and the 80mm by Carl Zeiss was the one that I went for. Now you can see here, this lens also has almost 360 degrees of turn, going from the minimal focusing distance all the way to infinity. So this lens is extremely smooth in the hands, it's a blast to focus with, but you can also make extremely minor adjustments to ensure amazingly accurate focus. On top of that, the image quality of this lens is absolutely superb, and you won't regret picking one of these up. In order to change lenses, what you do is you actually turn this ring that is closest to the camera body, and the lens will come right off. And to put the lens back on, you align this little metal nib with the very top middle of the lens mount, and then twist the ring back, and your lens is locked into place. Like I said earlier, this is a great camera for anyone who's interested in moving into medium format photography, or might just be interested in a 6x6 camera. The waist level viewfinder is super fun to shoot with and is extremely accurate with its focusing, so you'll have a lot of fun taking this out in the field and shooting portraits, landscapes, or whatever with it. It's just a blast to shoot with. With all that said, I'm going to show you guys a little slideshow of some of my favorite images that I've shot with this camera, so you can take a look at what it's capable of. Thanks so much for stopping by. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section down below, and I'll get back to you guys when I can. Thank you guys again. I really appreciate your time. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.